welcome back to the Old Ways Rising called skudding. This is a process where you take the hide after it's been soaking. These are the hides that this is the hide that we fleshed in the previous video. Okay, and I'll get it up on the beam and let it drip here a minute while I talk. Okay, and there's a second one in here that I did as well the same day. This is a much smaller one, much thinner. And it had some issues with tearing because of how small and thin it is. But you can see, if I kind of dump out this water, there's nothing in here but a little lime, so it's fine to dump out. That is very, very scuzzy water. Even though we scrape the majority of everything off of these hides, there's still a lot of junk down in them. So to do the skudding, what we're going to do is we're going to let them drip a little bit. We're going to take the fleshing knife, we're just going to run it down and just kind of squeegee out as much of that gross water as possible. We're also going to look and see if we missed any spots. Okay? Just squeegeeing out the gross water. Squeegee, squeegee, squeegee. This is not a long or a real strenuous process. You will splash yourself. You'll want to shower after for sure. There I see a little bit of grain that I missed, so I'll just go over that spot a little more. See another little bit there. Oh, that was just sitting there. You can get an official skudding knife that is just even duller than the fleshing knife. It's not necessary. You can just use the regular fleshing knife. Just be gentle with it. At this point, the hide is fully rehydrated. It's still in an alkali condition. It's still quite plump. Easy to rip in this condition. Okay. Squeegee out the gross. This I'm just going to cut off before I put it back in the bucket, so I'm not even going to worry about that. With that big hole there, that piece didn't dress out real well. There's no need to keep fighting it. It's that big neck hole. This hide came out really nice. Very happy with it. You can see this water coming out. It's real murky. Going to help press out the lime, because the goal here is both cleaning and getting all of this lime out of the hide. Okay. Here's a little spot I see where I missed a little bit of the grain. Go back over it. And that's the second reason to do this, is to go back over things, because if you recall from the previous video where I was doing the dehairing and graining, it was drying out the whole time. So there were a few patches where it was so dry, it didn't really cooperate as well as some of the other spots. But now that it's fully rehydrated, I can get those little Klingons. I don't even need Romulans to help manage them. Little nerd pun. Always got to have a little nerd pun. Okay, I think we're about there on that side. Now I'm going to do the same on the other side. Just work across it. Continue to get the membrane. Get more of that water out. It's still going to be rubbery and wet when you're done this. We want to get as much as we can. You can see there's water pooling here on this upside down trough. So we're getting a considerable amount of the water out. Keep going over it. And we'll end up doing this multiple times. So again, if you miss a little spot on this one, you can get it on the next one. Every time we'll get more of that membrane. Also, the membrane is mostly, getting rid of the membrane is mostly aesthetic. It's not going to interfere with process or change process the way having a bunch of grain left behind can. That can slow things down. If you have a hide that you bucked with a paste and you get some dry spots, you can just throw it that stick. You can just throw it in a bucket of water and come back to it the next day. It's going to be sloppier and a little bit less pleasant to deal with. I do not enjoy working with wet hides that still have the hair on them. That's why I like to do it with paste. got every... here's a little spot I missed. It's kind of hard to see if you missed a spot at this stage, but it's okay. Right? We're going to be doing this more times. We'll go over everything many times. Start in a slightly different place of the hide each one. So I'm going to call that good. Set it down on the snow for the time being. We'll work on this little thin one. Yeah, this was a little guy. This was a little guy. And you can see this one, I had a nightmarish time on this trying to get the hair off without tearing it because it is so thin. This was not a fun hide to work. I'm going to be real careful and only scud this lightly. Do want to try and get some of the spots that were sticking yesterday. A little bit of grain still on that patch. This one I should have thrown in the bucket of water with the hair right on it. It worked and I'd had a better time. But I was in one of those gotta get it done mindsets and it kind of bit me a little. I should have stopped and slowed down and changed my process up a little. This hide is not going to be a great one. But I'll get some little patches out at here and there to do something with. Make some little thing. Certainly won't give me any moccasin leather. You can see all the liquid coming out of that real well on that one. It'll absorb a lot. Section of grain I wasn't able to get yesterday. Work it off. Right. Just working it real lightly. And this was such an annoying condition because as you leave it in the bucking solution longer, the grain comes up and the hair comes off easier. But the hide also gets softer and softer. And when I'm already having trouble with it ripping, I didn't want to just throw it back and let it work longer. So we'll just do the best we can with it, and whatever that is, it is. Some are definitely more cooperative than others. And I think that there was also some slashing on the hide on the back here. Not sure if you can see that or not. I'm not sure if it's going to pick up. But right here I can see some slashes from the skinning knives. This one was not skinned as well as the other. So some of those rips are coming in from that as well. So this is not going to be a great piece. But I want to honor the life that was given as much as I can and get as much out of it as I can. I'm not just going to chuck it in the woods. Okay. Side's done. Go over the back a little. This one's so thin, I don't think I'm going to get much water out of the back. I wanted to show it to you and show you one that's not going quite as well. that you can see both sides of the story here. We're supposed to get some rain today. Should get rid of the snow that's on the ground. That's why it's a bit more overcast. There's that spot where it's all slashed up on the back. This is, if you go back to the first video in this series, I talked about the importance of skinning well. These are skinning slashes. There. There's a big score. That's why it was ripping. Couldn't see it that well when it was covered in slime. Yeah, that's why that was ripping. Those are skinning slashes. There's a big bunch of them. They didn't cut through it. They barely touched it. But as much scraping and work as you have to do on these, scratching the back is the same as cutting through it because it will rip in process. Okay, so these are both scudded. Both of those hides are ready for the next cleaning step. And the next cleaning step is the same as the first cleaning step. I'm going to trim off, now that I can see it well, I'm going to trim off some of these sections that are just tearing on me. Right, so that section there, there's not really going to be any good leather in there. And that's okay, because that's just the leg leather. So I'm going to do a little bit of trimming on this, because why waste time and effort fussing with something that's not going to give you a good product. And that one I'll leave on, that one's fine. And then I'm going to put it back in the bucket of soak water for another 24 hours. Now, every time you do this, you're losing that line, so you're getting closer and closer to a place where the hide can actually start to decay. So it's very important that these stay cool and that you don't push this too far. So I'm going to give this one more soak and one more scudding. I'll do that off camera. And then we will go to pickle it and fully remove the last of the lime and neutralize. So I will see you then. Okay, so off of camera, I did a little bit of work with these two hides, but only a very little bit. It's been about 24 hours since I filmed the last round of scudding. And I put them in Mr. Bucket and I soaked them in a couple of washes. 3 changes of water. At the end of that 3 changes of water, the last change of water, there's a little bit of murkiness, but not much. It was really pretty clean at this point. Okay, and these are no longer stinky. There's really not a lot of odor at all. They smell a little bit like raw chicken, pretty much, right? So it's not stinky. It's not offensive. It's not messy. It's not something that's a big deal to even have in a house at this point. Now, if you let them in fresh water for a long period of time, eventually they will get stinky, right? And it's not going to take as long as you might want it to. So I took them out after the 3rd change when it came up pretty clear, and I gave them another round of scudding. You can see they're very nice and consistent at this point. I did find some more pieces of grain to remove, to scrape off in that. Every time you do this, you'll get a little bit more. What happens is when you do the bucking, when you have them in the basic solution, the lime solution, that swells. The hide is basically like a felt, a mesh made out of protein fibers. When you put base on it, it swells that mesh. Okay? And it swells both the grain and the dermis, the main hide. It denatures the grain. It does not denature the dermis. So as we're slowly removing the alkali, removing the lime, the dermis is deflating.
and returning to its original thickness, but the grain is not. So the little bits and pieces of the grain that you missed in the first pass or first two passes are going to stay swollen longer than the dermis. So places where it was like smooshed in a little bit or a little dirty and you couldn't quite see that you missed a spot, as it gets cleaner and starts to contract back to its normal thickness, those will be exposed so you can see them and scrape them. Okay? Now, at this point, most of the lime residue is gone, but there's still going to be some in the, some stuck in the mesh, and we want to make sure that we get absolutely all of it and fully neutralize these hides. So today's soak and tomorrow's soak, instead of being clean water, are going to have a little bit of acid in them. Now, there's two acids that you commonly see used in hide tanning. The first and the most common, especially in commercial work, is sulfuric acid. Okay, dilute sulfuric acid, battery acid, right? Very, very dilute. If you took battery acid out of a battery and dumped it on a hide, you would not have a hide at the end of the day, right? So it's very, very dilute. What we want to use this for is to neutralize that last little bit of lime. We're not trying to truly acidify the hide. If you are doing a hair-on hide and you start reading recipes for tanning mixtures for hair-on, there will usually be a acid step right at the beginning, and that, instead of denaturing the dermis, the epidermis, it shrinks the epidermis and locks it in place. Okay? So a strong acid pickle will preserve the hair rather than remove the hair. Now, we have fully denatured that epidermis already, so having a little acid is not going to glue it back onto the hide. And again, every time you scud and work and scrape, you'll get a little bit more of like the little bits and pieces of grain that you missed, the little flecks that you didn't see before. So we're not going to make that stick back on. You can use straight dilute sulfuric acid, or you'll see a lot of recipes that use alum, aluminum sulfate. The aluminum is a tanning agent in and of itself. In a future video, when we start talking about tanning, I'll talk about tanning agents and what they do. The aluminum 3 ions in alum are a cross-linking agent that will tan hide. Okay? It is not just an acid soak, but it is an acid soak at the same time because alum generates traces of sulfuric acid. So that's the second way. It is still an acid soak, it is still sulfuric acid, it's just an indirect way to get there. Okay? So that's the first method, is sulfuric acid. The second method is vinegar. I like things that I don't have to be worried about. I don't want a lot of nasty chemicals that I'm going to have to figure out how to dispose of safely at the end of the day. So if I can use something that's food and is safe to dump on the garden at the end or in the grass or down the drain, I'm happy about that, right? And this is totally safe. This is not a recipe. Again, we're not trying to do anything physical to the hide itself. We're trying to neutralize the lime. Okay? So this is about a 1/10 full. Gallon jug, about a 1/10 full. And I'm just going to use this last 1/10 up. We're going to put this in on top of the hides, and then I will fill this bucket back up with water. And this will be the first neutralization soak. Tomorrow, I will scud them again. This will be the third scudding. And I will re-prepare this solution and then let them soak for 2 or 3 days in that to make sure it gets all the way through. And then, I just don't want to touch my face because I've been on, they're a little slimy. I just don't want to smear it in my hair. After that 2 or 3 day soak, I will scud them for the 4th and final time and then hang them up to dry. And at the end of the day, this is a deer hide that was treated with exactly the same process that I'm doing here. At the end of the day, this is what you will get. This is really, it's a little too thick to be called a traditional vellum, but if you were to take it and stretch it and then sand down the back, you would have vellum. Okay? So this could be used as vellum. This could be used as a drum head in its current condition. This could be used for a parafleece in its current condition. Words. Or this can be rehydrated and tanned by any method you like. Okay? Since this was grained, once it's tanned, it will come up as sort of a soft suede finish. It won't be a shiny finish. You could bark tan it. You would get a bark tan suede if you do that. You won't get a bark tan shiny carvable leather, but you would get a bark tan suede. You could do an alum tan and get a white Garmin leather. You could do an oil tan, or you could do a brain tan. You could do any of those. Okay? Now, I will put it back in some fresh water to soak for a little bit after I scud to get most of the vinegar out. When we dry it, we want it to be neutral. We don't want it to be acid or base in this final dried condition going into the next tanning step. So, I will soak out the vinegar for a few hours, but vinegar has, in addition to being safe, and literally like food that you can buy at the grocery store, vinegar has a second advantage over sulfuric acid, and that is it evaporates. So this hide still had a little bit of vinegar odor when I dried it. Totally gone now. So the vinegar will remove the base, and then drying will remove the vinegar. There will be no residual. Once this is fully dry, there is no residual acidity. Okay? So just allowing the vinegar solution to dry out self-neutralizes. Okay? So it's gone. Vinegar, acetic acid is very volatile. It evaporates, right? So that is going to be the rest of this process. I'm not going to film all of these steps because it's repetitive. But again, we buck, dehair, grain, and membrane. You soak for 24 hours. You scud. You soak in 3 to 4 changes of water for another 24 hours. You scud again. That's what I just did here. You soak in vinegar bath once. You scud again. You soak in vinegar bath a second time. You scud again, and then you dry it out. Okay? So that is the whole process to get to the rawhide stage. Now this chunk of rawhide, as long as this is kept dry and somewhere that, rodents can't get to it, nothing that would want to gnaw on there. If you have a dog, your dog would absolutely gnaw on that, and that ain't on me if you ruin a hide because your dog got to gnaw on it, right? But short of a vertebrate chewing it, nothing is really going to bother it. Bugs aren't going to bother it bad. There are some dermastid beetles that would go after it under really the right conditions. But if this is just stored dried in a house under any kind of normal conditions, it's not going to smell, it's not gross, it's not oily. The bucking removed all of the oils. It's just going to be totally stable in this condition as long as you keep it stored in a reasonable spot. So this is, I have no interest in trying to tan this in the middle of winter, right? You got to do the early stage processing when you got to do it. You can dry them hair on, but now bugs will get into it. Wool moths and things will get into it if you dry it hair on, right? So I like to go right to take the hair off as soon as I get the hide, and then dry it in this form. And then when we get a few of these ready, we'll go and we'll do some tanning, and we'll compare some different methods of tanning and preparing these. So that's something to look forward to during the summer. So I hope that you'll give this video a thumbs up and a like, and stay tuned for a couple of months from now when we play with tanning some of these hides.